I'm going to welcome up our next panel. This is our missing middle housing or workforce housing. And this group is pretty amazing. And so I hope that you find them as interesting and as amazing as I think they are. You good? Okay.
So I think you guys will run the slides probably when you get to your part after the first ones, just to make sure. So we just, I guess, press this button. Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I'm Morgan DeBusk, a CPA with Novogradic. You may have met my colleague Warren Sebra. So he's been with the firm for 20 years. I've been with the firm 10 years, learning from him. So if I have anything I don't know, you can blame him later. So one thing that I do as a CPA, I'm crunching numbers most of the time, and I work with affordable housing and do audit and tax work, as well as maybe development projects and consulting with clients, but I don't get to see the hands-on impact that most of you people out here actually do with the communities, and being able to be part of this today has been a great opportunity for me because I actually get to hear the stories of how you guys impact your communities, especially with talking with the panelists here, seeing how they have impacted their communities. It's just been an amazing opportunity to see that directly. So I first want to start by introducing our panelists, and then we also want to kind of go over some key terms and definitions that maybe is misunderstood or may not be well known before we dive into some of their stories. So in the order that I'm going is no favoritism. It's just based on how much they work on. So we have a large area focus of work versus middle area and then smaller area focus. So first it's Nathan Wildfire. He's a CEO at Missing Middle Housing Fund. And then we have Abisha Stone who is a Yamhill County Business Retention and Expansion Manager at Sedcor. And then Connie Lindsay, Director in Marketing and Corporate Communications at GK Machines. And then Nathan, I think, will go into the key terms for this industry.
Okay, thank you so much. And since I represent the Missing Middle Housing Fund, we don't fit into normal boxes, so I'm going to roam around a little bit. So a big question for folks often is, what does missing middle housing or what does workforce housing mean? And there's generally two ways to define that. The first way is really around housing typology. So that's like, what does it look like? How does it show up on the street? What's its design? And for, the first 150 years of our country's existence, housing happened in many different forms, right? There's what we would call courtyard housing. There's large apartment buildings. There's single-family homes. There's what we now call accessory dwelling units, which, a long time ago, people sometimes called their granny flat, right? There's the house above a garage. There is single-room occupancy boarding houses. There's all these different types of housing, but our zoning code over many, many years sometimes disallowed a lot of those types of housing, and so they're missing. They're that missing housing option that isn't necessarily the affordable apartment building that we see a lot of today, and it's not necessarily that single-family home. So it's very much by typology, and you see all over the country different efforts at re-allowing and enabling those old types of housing to again be possible, to create lower price points for folks to get into the housing market. So that's one way of defining missing middle. The other way is usually the one we think of when we say workforce housing, and that's usually defined by income. And depending on who's doing the counting, it could be 60% of area median income up to 120% of area median income, or maybe 80 to 120, again, depending on who's doing the counting. But that functionally means that if you fall in that income band, which is about the middle of our population, you won't be spending over 30% of your income on housing. We've heard a lot of that today from many different presenters. But that is actually the housing we build the least of in our country. We build the least housing for folks in that 80 to 120% of area median income. We don't build nearly enough affordable housing, but we do build some because there is funding for that. If you are in that missing middle band of income, you make too much money to qualify for big A affordable housing, and you generally don't make enough to be able to afford market rate housing near economic opportunity, near the jobs, near whatever you want it to be. And so it's missing. We don't build it. So those are the two main definitions of missing middle housing. Again, my name's Nate. I run the Missing Middle Housing Fund, which is an Oregon-based nonprofit. We cover the whole state. Our obsession is to double the rate of annual housing production in Oregon over the next decade for half the cost and half the time. As you've heard a lot, we have a housing crisis, but I like to start with this slide. Can you pop that up there? And I think the last panel talked a lot about stories. No, the other one, the pictures. Go back to the pictures. Yeah, this one. Okay, so I run a community choir in Portland. That's where I live. My community choir before the pandemic had about 20 different folks. Last night, I had rehearsal in my house, which we didn't used to be able to do, because now there's only 10 of us. So Scott, real person, he's a barber. Scott moved to Montana because he couldn't afford to live in Portland anymore, so I lost a tenor. Lottie went back to school, moved to Texas, because she lost her job and couldn't afford to live in Portland anymore, so I lost an alto. Buyer is a baker, real person, Buyer the baker, great name. And Lindsay is one of my sopranos. Lindsay provides senior care. She works in a senior care facility. Buyer the baker and Lindsay, the senior care facility person, cannot afford an apartment, so at the age of 38 and 39, they are now roommates, because that's what it takes to live in Portland. This story is true everywhere in Oregon. Again, I work statewide. It's acute at the coast. We heard examples about John Day and Madras earlier. It's acute there. I reconnected with a colleague from Lebanon today. It's acute there. Raise your hand if you have someone in your family, a friend, or someone you work with who is housing insecure. You probably know it. Yeah. I have two uncles who are on the verge of homelessness. My grandmother worked building affordable housing in northern Pennsylvania full-time till she was 80 years old, so it's a little bit in my blood. But this is the biggest issue of our day. People, places, and economies don't reach their true potential if there isn't enough housing in your communities. So, what's the biggest check most of us write every month, right? It's generally your mortgage or your rent. That's true of my choir. So it's personal for me, and I think it's probably personal for all of you, and sometimes we can say all these numbers and we can define terms at the beginning of a PowerPoint, but functionally this is about our neighbors, our family members. It's why we do what we do. These are the people we love and care for and work with. Okay, I don't have my, yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah, great. Green button, you say. There we go. So you've heard these stats, so I'm not going to dwell on them, plus it's too tiny to read. But our deficit's over 140,000 units. If we're lucky this year, the state of Oregon will build 13,000 units, and we need to be at 35 or 40,000 units. It's not a Oregon problem, right? We're not, sadly, we are awesome, but we're not unique. A lot of states have, every state has this problem. Why is it so hard to build? You're not supposed to be able to read this, don't worry. Why is it so hard? Well, it's zoning if you're a local developer. It's SDC fees if you're a local developer. We haven't talked a lot about general contractors today. You know what they would say? Labor. I don't have enough people, right? I don't have enough people, and the ones I do have aren't skilled to use the new construction technologies that lower the cost to build housing. If I talk to any national developer, they're going to just laugh at you if you say the problem is local jurisdictions. They're going to say, I have to do that everywhere. I have to do that in Minneapolis. I have to do it in Texas. I have to do it in Salem. It doesn't matter. I can't get financing. There's no such thing as a construction loan for missing middle housing. It doesn't exist. There is no mezzanine loan for workforce housing. We have spent the last 3 years talking about essential workers, but we don't build housing for them. If you go to any Echo Northwest presentation, you'll hear their presidents say the biggest barrier to hiring or retaining employees is access to housing. And that's at all income bands. You're going to hear from Abisha in a minute. Abisha and I do work in Newburgh together, and college professors at George Fox University can't afford or don't want to move to Newburgh because they get 3 times the house for the same price in the Midwest. So what do? That's a little wonky. The Missing Middle Housing Fund, what we do is we work for cities and employer bases to solve their workforce housing needs. So you too can hire me. All right? But we also just try to find the best innovators in funding, labor, technology, products, supply chain, and we connect them. We build a coalition of the willing and of the doers to try to solve this pro forma that just won't hunt. That's what we do. So here we go. This was kind of what I was describing earlier, right? If you're a national developer, you're going to talk about the financing not being possible. If you're local, you might talk about the red tape. If you're a GC, you're going to talk about labor. But here's the thing. If you want to build houses out of shipping containers or cross-laminated timber or manufactured wood products, or you've got a new app that enables you to do inspections differently, pretty much everything I just said is illegal. No zoning jurisdiction allows it, no permitting allows it, or maybe a little bit here and there. So you can't scale because you have to, do brain damage every time you go to a new town. And by the way, no bank will lend against it because they're going to say, wait, what's your comps? Oh, there's only 3 in the whole country? Ha ha ha. Too bad, housing innovator, you lose. And then you're going to go hire some folks to actually swing the hammers, and they're going to say, I've never done this. Right? So there's so many barriers against lowering the cost and time to create housing that there is no silver bullet. Maybe there's silver buckshot. If we take enough shots and we try enough things, and by the way, half of them are going to fail, we might figure out some ways to actually scale. So, who's doing what? Across the state, we have employers who are now saying my biggest barrier to growing is a housing problem. I make cheese, but my biggest problem is a housing problem. I provide health care, but my biggest barrier to getting employees is housing. By the way, number 2 is daycare. So these are examples of projects across the state that are employer-driven. Tillamook Creamery is working in Tillamook to actually create a loan fund to fund any kind of housing in Tillamook because most of the housing there goes to, does anybody from Tillamook? Anybody know? Yeah. Most of that is Airbnbs out there, right? The Bend Chamber of Commerce, we're hosting an event with them on June 6th, so if you're in Bend on June 6th, come on out. But they're working with land trusts like CORE in Mount Bachelor to solve a problem where a ski resort actually has to shut down on a snowy day in the winter because they don't have enough people to run the lifts. Ski bums can't afford to live in Bend anymore. At bottom left is Newburgh. You're going to hear a whole bunch about that from Abisha. Klamath County, Clackamas, and Mount Hood all are community colleges working on monetizing their land because it turns out if you work at a community college, you're in that missing middle, and most of their students are too, and it becomes a barrier to taking their classes or growing. Here's some of the innovators. If you were growing up in the 80s like me, the dream team is basketball. No? Nobody's a basketball fan? Come on. Guys, I know it's like 3:30 here, but come on. Get with me. Anderson Construction is a huge home builder and contractor who has assembled a group of subcontractors to actually think outside the box, literally, to create a module that can be replicated again and again and again for 30 to 40% less than typically building apartment units. Mods PDX, down on the bottom right, they're doing manufactured housing in a factory. So you build the homes in a factory and you ship them out. As long as it can fit on a flatbed, the components can fit on a flatbed, they can reduce building costs by up to 50%. Quantum Assembly makes housing out of metal. So it's big componentized metal pieces, it's steel. Again, building it in a factory, shipping it out. Walsh Construction is huge, has a secret sauce they call CEDC. I'm not going to bore you with the acronyms, but it's one way to do it. The next little funky emblem over there, that is urban form. So it's not always about building products. Urban form is artificial intelligence to run through zoning codes. So you can essentially tell very quickly what the code allows for you if you put in the inputs of your site. The one on the top left, that's Humankind Homes. They make housing out of geopolymer-based building blocks. This is the stuff that the Roman aqueducts were made out of, so you know it lasts. But it looks like Legos. And basically it takes 6 days and 6 people to build a house instead of 6 months and a group of 60. I'm not going to go through them all, but you get the idea. We're building a fleet of the willing and the creative to try to build housing faster and for less. So kind of the main point of my presentation is there is no silver bullet. We kind of need everyone, and this includes folks obsessed with affordable housing. Because if the hardest project to make pencil is the middle income housing, guess what? Anything we learn is applicable to the affordable housing world, whether that's innovations in cutting red tape, in financing, or in building products, materials, and supply chains. We're going to go to this, but Abhishek, I think I'm going to let you do this slide. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop. You'll hear more from me. Thanks for letting me roam around, everybody.
I don't quite have as much energy as Nathan because I only got to eat half my brownie during the break, but I'll try to keep you energized as we go through this. So again, my name is Abhishek Stone. I work for SEDCOR, which stands for Strategic Economic Development Corporation, and I think we have a slide here as well. So to help you understand the work that we do and how we got involved in workforce housing, SEDCOR provides professional services to Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties, and by contract to the city of Salem as well, to support traded sector businesses. That doesn't just look like direct support to traded sector businesses. It also involves us working very closely with the jurisdictions within those 3 counties to make sure that the communities are prepared for new industries that are coming to town, that it's the right fit, to make sure that, frankly, because it's a partnership, right? Businesses in communities, residents in communities, it's all a partnership. And we work to make sure that those partnerships are strong and growing, and make sure that our industry partners have access to resources that are available to them. We actually became involved in this conversation about workforce housing in 2019. I was approached by one of our industry partners in the city of Newburgh who said, Abhishek, we are struggling to find employees. So this was pre-pandemic, right, when the unemployment rate was 3.2% in the city of Newburgh in Yamhill County, and said, we know that one of the barriers is lack of affordable housing for our workforce in the city of Newburgh, but we know that other people are experiencing the same issue. We know other businesses are having the same problem. Do you think you could convene us? And I said, heck yes, that's what we do. That's what we enjoy doing the most, right, is convening our industry partners around a shared problem to identify solutions. So we did that. We brought a group of folks together. I believe it was 8 initially, business partners, and we started, like every group does, educating ourselves about the issue, identifying all the things essentially that you've been hearing about earlier today and that Nathan just ran through. is there really a problem? What is the problem? Why does the problem exist? And then getting to that point of what could we possibly do about it? So again, this group started convening late 2019. Of course, you guys all remember the global pandemic of COVID-19. Our group took a hiatus like many did at the time, right? Because everybody had more urgent things to focus on. If it helps you to understand that sort of urgency of other focus, some of those partners are the Newburgh-Dundee School District, Friendsview Retirement Center, ADEC, which is the largest employer in Yamhill County, Providence Medical Center, and who am I missing? George Fox University, which Nathan already explained. So, of course, educators, healthcare providers. When we did come back together in early 2021, we said, okay, how do we keep moving forward, right? Let's not lose momentum. We continued to grow our partnerships. We continued to look at opportunities for developing affordable housing jointly in the city of Newburgh. And last year, we were supported in those efforts by Representative Anna Scharf, who awarded us $3 million in funding to encourage a thing to get done, right? A solution to be built. And I have to say that this group, the Newburgh Workforce Housing Consortium, was really inspired by what GK Machines was already doing, which I know Connie is going to talk about. They and others like them, and the examples that Nathan has shared, has been our inspiration. So today, we have an active RFP out that we're currently reviewing the responses to. We are working to identify partners for developing workforce housing in the city of Newburgh. Over to you, Miss Connie.
Thank you. Can you hand me the clicker?
You bet.
Awesome. So GK Machine has been home in Donald, Oregon. Who knows where Donald is? Oh, good. I'm glad. 22 miles north of here, two gentlemen in 1976 decided to open a agricultural repair facility. Fast forward to today, we are a large manufacturer with 200 employees, and we build the equipment that feeds the world. And this is state-of-the-art, high-tech equipment that harvests and cultivates all kinds of different ag products. About almost 5 years ago now, we were struggling recruiting new employees. I could put to work about 80 to 100 more workers today if I could hire them. We were currently turning away 70% of our business. We were saying, sorry, farmers, we can't build your equipment. And one of our biggest hurdles is housing. Donald is a very small town. When GK started in 1976, there was 273 people in Donald. Today, there's just over 1,000 people in Donald. No housing has been built in the city of Donald in over 18 years. So, I did a little study, and I did this all by myself, and I went to the management and the ownership of GK Machine, and I said, do you realize that the majority of our employees commute to GK from all the surrounding cities, from Wilsonville and Canby, Silverton, Salem, Woodburn, Newburgh, McMinnville, and they're all commuting to Donald from these areas. And did you know that if they commute for more than 45 minutes to an hour, we will lose them in 1.5 years? So we became this awesome recruitment facility that trained up really great workers so they could go get a great job closer to home and not commute. And this continues to be our problem. One of the things that we had the benefit is the owners of GK have been farming for over 100 years. They were cheesemakers from Switzerland that homesteaded here in Oregon. And they own quite a bit of land and quite a bit of property around the city of Donald. So we embarked on the process of annexing 77 acres into the city of Donald to create workforce housing. And we worked with the city of Donald, SEDCOR, and the Oregon Housing and Development people and came together as a partnership to figure out how we could solve this problem. And I am happy to report that we are building a 350 home facility in Donald, 80 apartments, and some retail as well. But it's an interesting concept. We're going to build an agri-hood in Donald to work off of our agricultural history. Instead of building this neighborhood around a golf course per se, we're going to build this neighborhood around a working farm. And the people that live in this neighborhood can participate in the farm. They can volunteer and receive food from the farm. They can receive a box of food for a fee twice a month from the farm, a CSA program. They can also rent a raised bed area on the farm. We're going to bring farmers in to give canning classes, growing classes, how to organic farm. We're going to have all kinds of community events to teach people how to grow and cultivate and store their own food. So we're going to create what we call an agri-hood. And the agri-hood is now the first 50 homes, phase 1 and 2. Everything is in, and building permits are being issued right now. We're building the first 8 homes next month. And it's very exciting. Thank you.
So some common theme that you may have been listening to is there's a lot of challenges with these projects. One thing that we kind of want to touch on is what hurdles do you have to overcome? So Abisha, I would like to ask you, when you're trying to help develop these projects, what hurdles are you facing? And maybe what everyone kind of is thinking here is, well, how can I get involved, or what can I do to maybe be a participant of this?
Thank you for that question. So SEDCOR's role, like I mentioned, we're working with our traded sector industry partners and saying, okay, this is something, we really focus on industry-led solutions, and something that GK did, something that the Workforce Housing Consortium is trying to do. So I would say, from my experience, the biggest hurdles are lack of knowledge, lack of experience in this area, fear of risk, and folks feeling overwhelmed. Just to be honest, right? Those are the biggest fears. Okay, I know that we're having this problem. Am I the right person, or we the right people to address this, right? We don't deal with residential property development on a regular basis. I don't know what I'm getting into. Am I the right person to solve the problem? Do I throw money at it? Do I try to build a thing? Those are the biggest fears, right? And so when we come together and we have a chance to bring those partners together, to talk to developers, to partner with people like Nathan at the Missing Middle Housing Fund, you can tell from his earlier presentation why we decided to contract with him to help walk us through this process, because of his knowledge, his experience, his partnerships, right? Those formed partnerships over time that we don't have the experience or exposure to develop. It's through those conversations and partnerships that you start to wiggle out and determine what each partner's individual role might actually be. And when you have a large group of folks, sometimes it starts to get smaller, right? To put it simply, folks find that they don't have the patience for it. They don't have the tolerance for it in terms of risk. They get intimidated. They get tired, they get overwhelmed. We're talking about dealing with the city. One of the biggest frustrations for the business partners is when they can look at the things that the city has identified as being priority number 1 and 2, housing and childcare. Yet the city, so this is what frustrates them, is when they see those priorities, but they do not see the cities addressing the barriers that they have influence and control over to encourage those partners to develop those things, right? So we know that the state has a lot of influence and control over things that maybe our local jurisdictions don't, but that's where we need those local jurisdictional partners to show up. That is one thing that causes the greatest frustration for these partners.
And then something else, Nate, that you mentioned were some secret ingredients on how to make these projects work. I think you listed out 3 of those. Would you be willing to divulge that to the group today?
Yes. Here's the secret sauce. You ready? All right. So, secret sauce number 1, industry partners. Okay? They are the employers. Employers in your cities and towns are the things that, number 1, get things done. They typically have resources. They typically have land. They typically have political clout. Literally thousands of people work for them. So, like, if you get 6 of them to say the same thing, it generally happens. Here, we have Connie at GK Machine. They're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put the entire town on our back, and we're going to deal with this housing crisis because it affects our bottom line. But they're creating civic pride, they're creating community, like a whole lot of credit there, right? Like that's amazing. And so they're one of the best examples in the state at doing that. The folks that Abisha is working with, the employers in Newburgh, it's pretty rare that you get like the 6 biggest employers in a city who are like nodding and saying the same thing. And then dollars come, support comes, activity comes. Like we just had, Abisha was saying, we just had this RFP process and we attracted folks from across the country and of course Oregon. And then I just did the debrief with all of them and they were like, this was so unique. Like this does not happen in very many other cities, not just in Oregon, but in the country, that like all of the employers are coming together with the same need and participating in meaningful ways, right? So that's secret sauce ingredient 1. Secret sauce ingredient number 2 is capacity. Sometimes that looks like, like GK. Sometimes it looks like Abisha. Okay, so SEDCOR is the capacity in Newburgh. And again, that's not always that common. In Bend, I showed you the example of Bend. It's like their Chamber of Commerce. But there's got to be like someone who gets paid to help organize whatever it is you want to accomplish. And they then help raise resources, keep everybody in line, go find technical expertise, whatever it is. But secret sauce ingredient number 2 is capacity. You have to have someone who is mission aligned to do the work. Because as Abisha said, sometimes they quit. They move away. They get tired. So you need, again, they're making cheese or they're making agricultural machinery. Like they got other things to do. And then secret sauce ingredient number 3 is like, the one that exists since the beginning of time, cash. All right, so you will need resources. And sometimes that can be more modest than you think. It can be just enough to get started because money begets money. And again, if you have industry alignment, government generally comes, other resources come, capacity is there, but you need something. You need a spark. And sometimes that can come from your industry partners. Sometimes it comes from like Representative Scharf in Newburgh. Sometimes it can be a little bit of city dollars. But if you have skilled folks around the table, you take a little bit of money and you make it a lot. It's like the stone soup parable, if you know about that. So that's your 3 secret sauce recipes. Sorry to keep it so simplistic, but it's true.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to throw just a couple questions at you that I didn't give you preemptively. So if you want to deny them, you're welcome to. But something in Abisha's and Nate's, in your guys' introduction, Connie, you got to directly say what project most likely impacted you, since you worked on one major project. Would you both be willing to maybe talk about what projects most impacted you and maybe stood out the most that you've worked on or been able to be a part of, and how it impacted the community?
It's like there's so many.
Well, so my career spans a couple decades from Pittsburgh, where I'm from, to Vermont, where I lived, and now Oregon for the last 8 years. And in that universe, the projects that are generally the most inspiring to me are kind of the ones that center people. That's why I began with that story about my choir. I think it's kind of easy to lose sight of the fact that, like, My friend buyer, you know, is a housing struggle. It's a huge struggle for buyer right now. And I just want buyer to sing with me, right? So it's this, it's the notion that it centers people. And then the second piece would be, quite honestly, the ones that involve industry partners. I worked for the city of Burlington, Vermont, and then I worked for the state of Oregon. So I'm a recovering government employee, and I love working for government, and I still love that. But I'm also kind of realistic that it's slow, and it's a really big lever to pull, but it's really hard to pull it. The speed at which business happens can generally go much faster. So sorry, this is a lot of preamble, but if I'm going to pick, well, I'll just pick these two because they're great. So yeah, I mean, honestly, right? Like, so GK Machines example has been an example I've been looking at for years, and it's really about a very small place in Oregon with honestly really big creativity and really big investment and committed investment. So that's pretty inspiring. That's like, you know, a company sort of saying, we got this. And then the second, really, again, sorry to cop out here, but like the work that is happening in Newburgh, I work all over the state, and I do have to give it credit because it is a little weird. It's outside the box, and purposefully so. And that's rare. That's pretty rare that you're getting all those companies aligned, SEDCOR providing the oomph, and then, you know, rocket fuel in the case of state dollars. Like, that was bait, everybody. Like, Abisha went out and raised money, and because it was there with all these industries, it was like the best and brightest innovators from around the state and development interests are suddenly pumped about Newburgh. I don't know about you, but like until last year, Newburgh meant just wine to me, and now it means housing innovation.
Yeah, wine is important. Yeah, said Connie. You know, so this is the first workforce housing project that I have worked on, is working with the Missing Middle Housing Fund and the Newburgh Workforce Housing Consortium. SEDCOR has been a partner on the GK project for many years, and that's my counterpart, Nick Harville. I would say, and I've said before, I'll say it again, that project really, their project, inspired me to say, this could be done, right? And clearly it's been done. We all remember the mill town, right? This is how most communities were originally developed. But thinking about today, what can be done in today's climate with all the obstacles and the frustrations and these industry partners working so hard to just keep their production lines running, to keep it simple, right? To keep the offices open, while they're lacking so many needed bodies in their space. So outside of housing, right, because this is my first project that I'm working on, I'll say lots of what I've heard in the ether over the last couple of years about what other industry partners are doing in the state has been really inspiring. People actually building something, certain companies that are just giving money to developers or incentivizing them with low interest loans, as we heard before, right? That's a big barrier for developers, saying, build anything, build any kind of housing. And if you're willing to build any kind of housing in our community, then you can qualify for this loan. There's a lot of different approaches that are being taken, and all of them excite me. But in terms of another project that I worked on, I was just talking to Nathan about this, another DCI-based company during the pandemic started to learn about the childcare desert issue in our state, right? Every county is actually a childcare desert. Just depends on what age group, right? There's a little bit of variance there, but every single county is listed as a childcare desert. And once they learned that and they identified that that was the biggest issue for absenteeism during that period of time, they said, we're going to do something about it. And we partnered with them. We helped them identify a child care service provider. We went directly to the county and requested funds, which during the time were CARES Act funds were available for this sort of an investment. And they built a thing. They built 100 child spot facility in the city of McMinnville 40% of those spaces were reserved for their own employees. 60% were reserved for the community at large, because they realized what was happening, knew that somebody had to step up to do something about it, took the time to educate themselves, identify the right partners, put their own money into it, committed themselves to it, and then said, we can't just do this for us, we need to do it for others as well. And that sort of mindset has carried over into this Workforce Housing Consortium group, where they're saying, gosh, it would be so great if we could actually hire people from out of town, and when they came here to look at where they might live, they didn't run screaming away because they either couldn't afford it or chose that it wasn't the right move for them to try to afford it. And when you're talking with George Fox University, the school district, Providence, the ADEC, the largest employer in the county, and they're all experiencing this issue. We're not just talking about entry-level people, we're talking about professors, we're talking about highly paid engineers. People cannot get folks to move to the community, and at the same time, this group is saying, we can't just try to address this for ourselves. That wouldn't be right. We need to try to figure out how to address this for the community. And I would say that's one of the things that's caused this group to take longer to get to that decision point of what is it going to be, because they're struggling with that. And that's inspiring to me.
Great. And Connie, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I would just piggyback on the fact that it does take a lot of partners and a lot of support from the local community as well as the county level.
Excellent. Now, would each of you like to give, if you had one piece of advice for the audience members before we open up to questions from the group, what would you like?
Patience is a virtue. Yeah. Yes, it's been a long process, I have to say. And COVID did delay the project. I think we are about 1 year and 3 months behind schedule because of COVID, but it was out of our hands, So we're excited that we're finally seeing the end of all of our hard work for the last 5 years.
And how long did your project take in total, about from start when you guys first started thinking about entering that into the finish line?
Well, the dreaming up stage happened about 5 or 6 years ago, and then we actually started on the project in just about 5 years ago. Yeah.
Incredible.
I have so many pieces of advice. So the first, that's great. I love Connie's, be patient. Also, to echo what Connie said, partnerships are key. But when I'm talking to my industry partners, the advice I would have is, if you believe it, just do it. Just start taking a step forward. Every day, take that next step forward. Of course, the partnerships need to be there. To our jurisdictional partners, to our cities, our counties, our state partners, I say, try to do better at decreasing the barriers. Put your money where your mouth is. If you say that this is important, then work toward every day, just like these guys are every day putting their foot in front of them to work toward getting to that end goal of building, creating, establishing a solution. Please be alongside them. Please work toward decreasing the barriers that they're facing. These are not a surprise to any of us. No jurisdictional partner that I've spoken to where I've said system development charges are a hurdle is ever surprised. When I say that your permitting process is so long that it's adding cost, it's adding a significant cost, that's not a surprise. They know it. And I understand they struggle, right? Everybody's struggling with employees, even our jurisdictional partners, right? So how do you get those things processed? But I would recommend that every single day you also put your best foot forward trying to meet those folks where they're at, because there are very dogged, very determined partners in this community trying to do good things. And but they are not without their own distractions, their own business, right? They're not without their own distractions, and some of them get burned out at the crux of where they interact with you. So let's all do better, move forward, one step at a time. I guess that's my very long best advice.
Okay, has anybody in here, raise your hand if you have taken an improv class. Oh, come on. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so this is for you. The rest of you, take an improv class. That's my best advice. There's a concept in improv, it's called yes and, okay? And so when you are approached by your fellow, amateur comedian in your class and you're all nervous, and Abisha tries something, I don't just shut it down, right? Because an audience can tell that you're like, Abisha, that's a dumb idea. I'm not going to do that. And the audience doesn't laugh. And the whole point of improv is to create a made-up world where the best and funniest things are possible. So you figure out what Abisha's doing, and you say, yes, and then you take it the direction you want to take it, or you fill in the gap that maybe you thought Abisha forgot, right? You don't just say, no. Nobody thinks that's interesting. Nobody moves forward with the comedy. Nobody moves forward with the great world you're trying to create on that stage. And I think about that a lot when I think of innovation. So there's you heard so much today that's like dire. Oh my God, we have this housing, and it's all true. It's really a huge break on our economy. But there's so many good things happening. There's so much hope everywhere I look, and people working so hard and putting their best creativity and their best resources and their best time into solving the issue of the day. And my advice to you is always say yes and. Yes, I want to hear that idea. Yes, that is so far out of my worldview. That is so out of the box. That literally violates 8 city codes. Yes, and. How do we get there, right? Like, no one will pay for that. Are you out of your mind? It turns out somebody might. You just have to, all of the folks who have come here today have had their shoulder at this huge boulder for so long, and our shoulders are tired, and thank God we've done it, because it would be so much worse if we hadn't. But I just showed you, we're 140,000 units short. And this year, we're going to build way less than half as many units as we need. So our shoulders are tired. We've been doing great work. And by any measure, we're failing. So we have to be creative. We have to think outside the box. We have to, yes, and. Give me your crazy ideas. If you've got an idea that's coming to you from Rhode Island, sign me up. I don't know anything about Rhode Island, but I bet they have good ideas about housing because they have a crisis too, right? And if you've got an industry partner, a company in your town, and they say, this is my big barrier, invite them for coffee. They probably have an idea. They probably have a resource that we've never thought about, So that, improv. Keep improving, everybody. Don't shut it down. That comedy sucks.
Now we have about 8 minutes left. I wanted to open it up to you, the audience, if you have any questions. It looks like we have one right over here.
Hi, Tiffany Otis, City Salem Federal Program, CDBG and Home. And I was CDBG COVID, third tranche, and we did childcare. Yep. And we were able to get 31 new businesses up and running to take on that leap. Even with the LMI restrictions of them being able to afford the barriers, if you will, to be able to be in the classes that was collaborated with between Community Action Agency, CCR, Early Learning Hub, and Schmeketa. And Schmeketa wrote the curriculum to be able to do that. Also, in conjunction with GK Town is Amazon Town in Washington, D.C., on the way to the airport that had to build their workforce availability. They were apartment buildings, and I learned that from the taxi cab on the way to go back home to Oregon because it wasn't, directly in Washington, D.C. But recognizing with GK's, development and making this 350,000 or 350 homes in the apartments, 80 apartments, do you have a childcare facility? Have you checked into businesses, even, your early Head Start through community action agencies or Montessori? Pieces that would be able to benefit, in that community.
And you're absolutely right. Child care is the second hurdle for our employees. And hiring more employees, it will be even more, right? GK has been looking at facilities. We just looked at a church in the city of Donald that is currently vacant and has some property adjacent to it. Again, I'm going to need some industry partners, so I am actually approaching Wilco, Marion County, or Marion Ag, as well as Wilco, which is also in Donald, because we're all in the same boat. We all need childcare. And it's not going to do a lot of good to build 350 homes and 80 apartments in Donald if they're going to be driving to Newburgh and to drop their kids off and drive all the way back to GK. I'm defeating the purpose, right? So this is what we're currently exploring. Now that I'm off of this project, and my next project as the communication director at GK is to work on the child care issue.
We should talk after.
We should.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Any other questions out there?
We've beaten them into submission.
Okay.
Oh, I saw one.
I saw one over there.
It's been a long day. A lot of good thinking.
So it's really inspiring to hear how business partnership and outside resources from cities are getting together to solve the problem. In areas where that's not readily available or not an option, are there tools or trades that you can suggest of how to promote workforce housing and getting it developed where it's actually going to be sold at workforce housing prices without having subsidies?
Without ongoing subsidies, right? I think in the session right before this, there was some conversation about donated land, right? If jurisdictions can identify buildable land that they could donate. So anything that can really help to offset the cost of development. Also, we keep hearing from potential partners, from folks that are trying to figure this out as well and actually developing housing, that one of the large contributors to the cost is the high interest rates associated with development loans. So we've been talking internally about whether there's a role for us in that space. We've also been talking to lenders about what that reality looks like. We've not gotten there yet, but considering approaching our CDFI partners and saying, could those funds be used to develop a low interest loan program? Some of our communities, I was inspired when I was hearing this gal in the last session talk. I'm thinking some of our communities have funds that were intended for business development that might be held at their local council of governments or with other partners that might be able to be transitioned into low interest loan programs. So whatever, and then of course Nathan might have something to add to this as well about partnering with innovation partners around building materials and design, right? So whatever you can do to decrease that cost. But those biggest factors that I've been hearing is really around the cost of land, the cost of the loans, high interest rate loans. So, you know, I was hearing somebody say 10%, I've heard up to 12%. And then the amount of time that they have to carry those loans. It gets back to our city partners about permitting, expedition, and staffing. Those would be the things I would say I think move the needle the quickest.
Yeah, the ditto. That's great. Like, those would be my top ones for sure. Even in smaller communities in Oregon, there are banks, right? There are financing engines, and there are philanthropic resources that have rarely ever been asked to make performing investments. Philanthropy is generally asked for grants. They are usually not asked to make loans, but they can, right? And they can do it at below market rates and recycle those resources back into their communities. I mean, I was doing that in Pittsburgh 20 years ago. We just don't necessarily have a history of that in our philanthropic community here in Oregon, but it is a way to solve project gaps. And on the land issue, it can also be things like land leases, ground leases, right? So you don't necessarily always want to give up control of your land, but you want to create cash flow from it You can do that in ways by actually contributing it to projects, but still earning revenue and retaining control. And then the last one, you know, back to my yes and comment, like there are so many crazy people and they're good crazy. Like they just are like, I just need to get to like pilot project 1 or, you know, prove that I can go from 1 unit or a model to 10. Do you, Lebanon, want to be the place where the first geopolymer block house is built in Oregon? Who knows, maybe. But there's these entrepreneurs that are hungry to just prove that what they're doing works. And so I don't ever want this room to take advantage of entrepreneurs, but you sure can. So, you know, like find a way to get their pilot project in your community, learn hard lessons with them, and then what works, scale it again and again and again.
And if what Nathan just said interests you, boy, do we have a conversation for you. Yeah. So let us know.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Also, I will deny ever saying that you should take advantage of entrepreneurs.
Is this recorded?
I don't know, it's probably recorded. I'm screwed either way. I love you, entrepreneurs.
Well, I just again want to reiterate how impressed I am with just everyone who's presented today, as well as these panelists and the communities that they've impacted, and the group here, what you guys have all done, just even brief conversations I've had in between these panels. So thank you so much for coming out today and discussing this topic with us. And I hope you guys learned something new, or maybe made you think a little bit more about what these groups are doing in your communities.
Thanks. Thanks, Megan. That was fun.